This viewer asked, would you please post a video on the classic chiaroscuro techniques, the steps, and the best palette for that style of painting? You might, after you watch this quick tip, check out quick tip 320, because there the question was about the difference between chiaroscuro and no tan, but I focused the attention on no tan in that one. On this one, we're really going to explore those classic techniques. One of the best ways to explore any kind of techniques that artists use is to study master artist works and study how that artist did it. Now, Peter Paul Rubens was a painter in the 17th century, right after Rembrandt, or during Rembrandt's time. He used this technique often. What it is all about light. It's putting a strong emphasis on light, a much stronger emphasis on light than what the normal eye would see. And normally in paintings where the chiaroscuro is emphasized, areas around the area that's being emphasized by light are really subdued in value. So it's all about value. Now, as far as the palette you would use to explore this, you can use any palette, but there's a requirement, and that is that you have the ability to go the darkest dark possible with those colors, and that you have the ability to go the lightest light possible, because the chiaroscuro technique includes both. You have to have that darkest dark surrounding the light in order for us to read that really, really strong light that we see emanating from the subject itself. And I think emanating is the term there about what the light actually does. But the technique is about modeling the light. It's not about the shadow, as we include in most of our techniques, but it's more about modeling the light. So let's look at what Rubens has done here a little bit closer. You can see here that most of the surroundings, the strongest light is right in here, right in there. You see how very, very strong that is, but you see it's surrounded by really dark all right in here. And we see some other figures defined here, but you'll notice the values of these figures are closer in relationship than the value here. You can see here the lightest light on this one is darker, really, than the lightest light here. Now, if these subjects were in real light, those would be more or less equally lit with a little bit of difference, but we would see also more in the shadow. So we're going to explore how we would do this sort of thing technically. Now, one of the best ways to explore is not to try to copy this, which a lot of people do, and that's okay, but there's another way I think is better, and that is to use a simple subject, a simple form to explore what's going on there. If we tried to copy this, we might get caught up in trying to copy the image itself, but it's not the image that's important when we're learning the technique. It's how we do it, how we achieve the effect that the technique gives us. So the effect we're going after is really strong but modeled, meaning that there is a gradation, a very subtle gradation between the strong light and the extreme dark. And so it includes both. It includes getting that value relationship of that strong contrast, the strong value contrast, but it also involves modeling or gradating those edges. Blending is another word for it. And also how much of that we have. So I'm going to do a very short demonstration here that you can try if you're really interested in using chiaroscuro in your works. Start out with exercises. Don't go straight to a painting and try, but start out with exercises, and I think this is simple enough that you would find it easy to do. So what I've done here is I've used a simple palette of complementary colors. And the reason I've done that is because I want the ability to be able to get neutrals as well as darks, but also get some warm light and more or less cool dark. So that's really not a bad palette to start out with. So we'll just start here, and I'm just going to start by beginning to block in the darkest darks I have on this palette. So I'm just going to mix. This is ultramarine blue in this row. I've got 3 values of ultramarine blue laid out on the palette. And this is the Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red, and I have 3 values of that. This really is a red-orange, which is not an exact complement, but it's kind of it is a cousin complement of ultramarine blue. So I'm going to start here. Now, when I put that down, you see it really looks like black, but it looks very much like we see this. Now, when you see the painting in reality, you see it a little bit. You see a little bit more variation in that dark than we see here, but it's not the variation in the dark that we're after in interpreting this. It's about that relationship of dark and light. So I'm just going to set up, first of all, and I want to set up this dark area around it first, so then it would make it easier for us to identify the degree of darkness we'll need in that light. So I'm kind of following what I see right here as I'm moving from here, or as I'm moving my brush around in the negative area there. And I'll put some variation in value on it, but just for interest, but not very much at all. So we'll just get sort of a straight side there and throw that in. And I'll do the same thing back now, because this is teaching a chiaroscuro technique. I'm not going to bother with cast shadows here. We're not really aware so much of cast shadows. We have a little bit right in here, but that's not the important thing. That's just sort of icing on the cake. So I'm not going to focus on that. I'm just going to focus on the chiaroscuro technique. So I won't even take this all the way to the edges, since this is the technique we're going to be focusing on. I won't take this all the way to edges here. I just do kind of a little vignette for you to show you a way of studying this. This is my purpose anyway. So now I'm going to work this right to the edge here and over here like this, so that we have a good, let's get that a little bit more paint on that brush. So we have that dark that we can work against, that really, really rich, deep dark that we can work against for creating the chiaroscuro effect. And I'll do the same thing over here. Now, here what we have in this particular form, you see the light, really, the major light part of the form covers most of it. There's very little shadow on the form itself. And then we have this negative area back here that is in rare, very, very dark shadow. So that would be equivalent to sort of what I'm doing right here. So I'll just bring that up, and doesn't have to be precise, just to set the value there, so we have something to work against. Now, pull a little bit more of this over here, like that. Now I'm going to give just a little bit of variation back there just to show you that, and I'll go into the middle value here for each color. But I'm going to go into these mixtures and get a value that you might, on the value scale, might call it about a value 8. That is just a little bit of a variation. And see what I'm doing here now is doing kind of the equivalent of what we see in there. Just enough value variation to indicate that there might be some other images back there. But the images that are back there are not what this little study is about. So we might do the same thing down here, because we see the images right in here, but we'll gradate all those. Won't have anything that is sort of sticking out. That's just to give the variation. We can even pull that right up there. As long as we keep that very, very dark, we're in good shape there for our study. Remember, what we're studying here is a relationship of value. In this particular study, it's a relationship of value. Now I'm going to rinse the brush out really, really good. And I want to go now on the inside, and let's look at now how will we create that classic, is what the viewer asked for, that classic chiaroscuro technique. So I'm going to start with the shadow portion of it. And so we'll start, you see right in here, we see that very, very dark shadow. I'm going to start here again with that darkest dark. I'm going to lean that one, I'm going to lean the actual hue of that a little bit more towards the warm to differentiate it from the cooler version we see here. Now I want to get that just a little bit lighter, but keep it in that very, very, very dark value range. And I'll just, now this is, just bring that over here. Now I don't need much of that. I need just enough of that over here to show that this is a part of the form. That's all we need. And as far as this is concerned, if this is a open container, then we might do a little bit of differentiation about right in here. Let's just assume this open container, and a little bit right around the edge right here. Don't need much at all. So this is not traditional modeling. It's not a traditional value study that you might do on the cylinder where you're trying to show a gradation of full value range. That's not what this is at all. This is getting just enough of the shadow value in there so that we can get the feeling of the chiaroscuro. I'm going to put just a little bit of that now right over here, and I'll show you why. It's not a rule that you follow. I'm getting that from right here. There's just a little bit, not very much, little bit of shadow value we see creeping into the edge of the form, but a major part of this is light. And I'll do the same thing down here. And this is, remember that what I'm working with here is a value that's slightly lighter than the background. Not much, just very slightly lighter. All right, so that's enough of that. Now, rinse the brush out really, really good. And dry it really, really good. All right, what we have then is a quick jump. At this point, I have a close-up of this figure that I want to put up here so that you can see. This is a quick jump, very small value area, very small shadow area, you see, like what we have right there. In fact, I think I'll probably just give that a little bit more blend, let it kind of blend into the background, kind of a lost edge there where we don't see where the figure ends and where the image begins, and do the same thing over there. Okay, for the study. Then we see what happens. There's a quick jump from this dark, dark shadow value right here over into the light. And so if you look at that interval, if we think in terms of value intervals, this jumps about 4 or 5 intervals right there. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to go directly over into this middle value right in here. And I'm going to keep it leaning a little bit. I want it more neutral. This is, it doesn't matter really. What matters is the value. It doesn't matter so much of the color when you're doing a study like that. Now, let's just put a little bit of that down right here and see. There we go. There's a good little transition from shadow into what in chiaroscuro we would interpret as the light. Just a little bit of transition. Now we have a little bit of that transition over here, but this one jumps even further, even stronger into light. So I'll put just a touch, not very much. Now this is the technical part of it. Just put a touch of that there. Then we go over into the light. Now we go strongly into the light. Now put a little bit of that blue into the transparent oxide red mixture with white. The solid world that is white with transparent oxide red. Let's see. All right, now we place that. You see how strong that is? We place that light right there, and we place it here. Now I'm going to place before I blend. This chiaroscuro approach can be used with alla prima, or it can be used with the layer method of painting, where you paint in layers rather than forming the image all together on the surface. So I'll do that. Now get some more of that, and let's pull this right over in here like that. I'm just building it gradually. I haven't done the blending yet. I'm just building it gradually. Now I'm going to let it lean a little bit towards blue in some, cool in some areas. So a little bit of that might go in here. Let's just lean it just a tiny bit more, like a little bit more. Whoop, that was too much for chiaroscuro, entirely too much. Okay, just a little bit of a value change right in there. And let's get that just a little bit cooler. A little bit cooler, maybe right in here. And I'm kind of randomly doing that. You can see what he's done there. He's chosen areas that would be a slight little dents in the body where he's going a little bit cooler. But the cool warm is part of what emphasizes that whole thing. So now I'm going to rinse the brush out. And I'm going to hit it really hard with the strongest light I can get and still have a little bit of hue in that brush. So dry it really, really good. And for that, you might think this is the strongest light. For that, I'm going to go into the white, pull it down here, add just a touch of this into it, and hit it here, 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 here. And I'm hitting it in the rounded spots where that would come around. Now, that's basically the underlying structure, technically. Basically, you might call that step 2, because step 1, of course, would have been setting the dark background for it. Now we go to the blending. And for the blending, I'm going to move to a different brush. And I have a paper towel in my hand. And it's just going with a smaller brush. And I want all those edges blended. So I'm going to start right in here. And I want to blend those edges, just touching the edge and giving it a little bit of motion, touching it very lightly and giving a little bit of motion. And here, see what I've got to keep this on camera so you can see what I'm doing. I'm constantly wiping the brush. And now you don't see anything that's not blended in there. It's part of what makes the chiaroscuro work. Is to have all that blended so that it looks like it all belongs. So it's sort of a time-consuming thing, which is a good reason for doing a simple geometric image like this. Now I'm bringing this down, get this just down, and get these edges blended. I'm just using the corner of the brush here, very dry, no paint in it whatsoever. Very, very dry, and just working those edges back and forth, gives it a little bit of a side vertical stroking this way, and I'll come this way. Just barely got the corner of that brush touching to get that smooth blend. I need to get this a little bit more smoothly blended here. Let's give it just kind of a vertical stroke, and a little bit more smoothly blended in here, like that. And then keep wiping the brush, keep pulling the paint out of the brush, so that you always have a clean brush to do the next blending. And blend every edge. You look for edges. Every edge that you created when you placed those colors in, we might have called that the block in. I didn't use that term, but we could have called it the block in. But every one of those edges needs to be blended. You see it right in here, just a very, very smooth blend. Now, to get that classic blend, it would take quite some time. So I'm not going to take the time. I'll just get those blended to the point. There we go, crisscrossing, and this very gentle, very subtle motion that we've got there. And let's get these edges down here. So I can't emphasize the importance of wiping that brush. And let me say, I didn't mention this. This needs to be a softer brush. The softer brushes work much better with the blending than the bristles. So I'm just going to work that back and forth, barely touching that surface with the brush. You see, the more I work it very subtly, Very subtle. The more I work it, you see, the more more subtle that blend becomes. Work it back in here. Keep working it like that. All right, let's do a similar thing over here now, where I'm going to just barely touch it. I'm going to turn the brush right here on its corner. Be sure I have all that paint out of it. The brush needs to have a little bit of firmness to it, but no stiffness. So this is, if somebody's going to ask me, this is the little rosemary. It's a 374. I always forget the numbers. But it's one of the most versatile brushes for oil that I have ever worked with. So I'm really a fan of the rosemary brushes. Okay, now I'm going to put you. So when you're blending, you just keep an eye on the edges, and you work, but you're sure that your brush is only touching just the edges that you're working with, because we want all that to disappear. We want all that edge to disappear. See, I'm kind of using a sweeping motion now. Very, very subtle. All right. Now I'll do the same thing here in the lighter areas. Get those edges blended. I don't need to touch. I shouldn't touch the areas inside. My goal is just to get rid of the edges. But if you touch that whole area, you get the whole thing. You'll lose all that light. All the light will get blended out, and so it's a better idea just to use a smaller brush, one that you've got. Keep it constantly wiped, constantly clean, and you're just a whisper. It's barely touching those edges. You see, you watch those edges just blend in, and they begin to sort of breathe, kind of like Rubens does, believe it or not. So this is one of those things. It's not talent; it's skill, it's technique. But it requires patience, it requires time. Now let's see. Do I have that blended enough for it to feel like chiaroscuro, or I still could spend some more time, and it might not be a bad idea now that I've worked with that brush to come back with an even softer brush like this one. This is just this soft brush is not available, but something like goat hair. A goat hair brush would do this very well, where you just barely touch it with this brush. And with this brush, you have to be careful that you don't lose all that it doesn't touch anything except just the edges, and get just a little bit more. And you see, the more I do to it now, the more subtle it becomes. Now you can overdo, and then it loses all of its light. Now see, it might work better as chiaroscuro. Now if I put a little bit of this light back in up here, you can see right up here, where we have the lighter, very strong lights that are really emphasized in areas where their muscles are turning towards us there. Well, this is not a muscle turning towards us, but now to go back and rebuild lighter areas like this, where I've got just a bare amount of paint on the brush, and I'm holding the brush almost parallel to the surface and barely touching that area, and putting some of that light back in, getting it blended as I go this time. Let's see where else I would need. I would like to get this a little bit more blended, this edge a little bit more blended right here. And I'd like to get this edge blended a little bit more right here. And I'd like to get this edge blended. Now this is pure skill. There's no talent involved in here. The only talent is patience. Pure skill. You see, the more you work that, the smoother it gets. Now it does reach a point where it will just die on you if you overdo it. So we don't want to do that. I'm going to put just a little bit of that, build a little bit of the darker right here, not there, not that. Just a little bit more right here. Just wanted to get that, yeah, a little bit lighter right in there as that shadow's coming around. Now let's give that a sweep with this brush. The soft, very, very soft. And you can see now, probably that's enough to show you that technique of the chiaroscuro. So if you're really interested in chiaroscuro painting, give yourself enough time and put on your patience hat, because it's going to take some patience and control and constantly wiping the brush. But I think you'll find it's a lot of fun. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.